The inspection officer stared at the object on the table for so long that Lieutenant Elias Venn almost started feeling sorry for him. Almost. The officer was Girardi. Tall. Thin. 4 black eyes arranged in a square across a narrow face. His skin shifted in tiny silver waves whenever he got confused, and right now the waves were moving so fast it looked like light flickering across water. This item, the officer said carefully, does not appear in Coalition infantry standards. Elias leaned against the processing counter. That's because it's mine. The officer looked down again. It has no battery. No. No smart link. No. No biometric lock. No. No signal output. No. The officer touched the object with 2 careful fingers like it might suddenly wake up and attack him. It was an axe. Not large. Not decorative. Just real. A dark wooden handle wrapped in faded grip tape. A steel head sharpened by hand so many times the edge had become slightly uneven. Tiny marks covered the metal. Old impacts. Old repairs. Old history. The weapon looked used. That bothered them more than anything else. You carry this into combat? The officer asked. Yes. With intent to use it? Yes. The silver waves across the officer's skin stopped completely. That, Elias had already learned, was very bad. A second officer was called over. Then a third. Then a tactical examiner. Within minutes, 5 aliens stood around the table staring at an axe like archaeologists discovering fire for the first time. A drone technician scanned it twice. No internal systems, she said quietly. Correct, Elias replied. No targeting assistance. No. No kinetic boosters. No. How does it function? Elias looked at her. You swing it. Nobody spoke after that. A medic standing near the wall watched him instead of the weapon. She was one of the tall pale Ithri, with long hands and dark eyes that blinked sideways. Elias noticed she had not laughed once. That already made her smarter than most people on the station. The officer cleared his throat. Coalition regulation requires classification for all combat-capable equipment. Then classify it. That is the difficulty. Elias took a sip from the awful station coffee in his cup. The officer continued carefully. There is no category for manually operated bladed weapons without electronic support systems. Sounds like a paperwork problem. The drone technician made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. The officer ignored her. He lifted the axe again. This design is extremely old. Yep. How old? Elias shrugged. Depends what version you mean. The room became very quiet. The officer stared. You cannot mean. Humans have been using axes longer than most coalition species have had recorded language. Silence. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind that lands slowly. The Ithri medic near the wall tilted her head slightly. What for? She asked softly. Elias looked at her. Unlike the others, she was not asking what it could do. She was asking why it still mattered. That was a better question. For the same reason we still carry emergency oxygen, he said. Because eventually something fails. The tactical examiner frowned. But your modern weapons are vastly superior. Most of the time. The examiner folded 2 of his arms behind his back. And when they are not. Elias looked down at the axe. The steel edge caught the white station lights. Then this still works. Nobody wrote that sentence down. But everybody remembered it. The inspection lasted another hour. Every item in Elias's kit caused a new problem. A field knife. A compact revolver. A length of braided cord. Physical maps. Paper notebooks. The coalition processing systems hated all of it. Their entire military structure depended on tracking signals, monitoring power output, predicting weapon behavior through system integration. Human equipment kept refusing to cooperate. The revolver caused the largest argument. It uses chemical detonation, the examiner asked. Yes. You intentionally carry controlled explosions near your body. Yes. That is unsafe. Elias nodded once. Very. The Ithri medic made that sound again. Definitely laughing this time. By the end of the inspection, The officers looked exhausted. Not physically. Existentially. The lead examiner rubbed both temples. I am required to ask why humanity continues maintaining obsolete combat tools despite possessing superior modern alternatives. Elias rested his hands on the counter. The station lights hummed softly overhead. Around him, alien officers waited for an answer they expected to be tactical, or technical, or mathematical. Instead, Elias said, "Because history keeps breaking expensive things." The room went still again. The drone technician slowly lowered her scanner. The Ithri medic looked at him for a very long moment. And for the first time since arriving on the station, Elias got the feeling somebody here understood the difference between primitive and dependable. They finished the paperwork in silence. When Elias finally gathered his gear, the lead examiner spoke one last time. "There is one thing I do not understand." Elias slung the axe across his back. "What's that?" "If these weapons are so old," the examiner said slowly, "why are humans still training with them?" Elias adjusted the strap on his shoulder. Because the question deserved a real answer, he actually stopped to think before speaking. Then he said, "Same reason you teach children how to swim before they ever see deep water." The examiner frowned. Elias headed for the door. Behind him, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And somewhere deep inside the coalition station, buried beneath layers of technology and systems and predictive warfare models, a very uncomfortable idea quietly began spreading. Humans prepared for failure differently. Not because they expected to lose. Because they remembered what losing looked like. Elias reached his quarters near the outer ring of the station. Small room. Metal walls. Recycled air. The familiar smell of machinery that never truly slept. He set the axe carefully beside the bunk. For a moment he simply stood there looking at it. The weapon was old. Older than the station. Older than the coalition itself. Older than some civilizations still alive. The edge carried tiny marks from years of sharpening. His grandfather had taught him that. Slow strokes. Consistent angle. Respect the edge. His grandfather had learned it from someone else. And someone before that. Generation after generation. Not because humanity lacked better weapons, but because somewhere deep in human memory existed a lesson older than civilization itself. One day the fire goes out. One day the machines stop answering. One day all the smart systems fail. And when that day comes, you survive with what your hands still remember. Elias sat on the bunk. Outside his quarters, the station buzzed with scanners, signals, engines, data streams, tactical networks, and millions of lines of code running every second. Inside the room sat a sharpened piece of steel and wood. Silent. Patient. Completely unconcerned with the future. Because it had already survived the past, the patrol assignment arrived 3 days later. Lieutenant Elias Venn read the briefing while sitting in the station mess hall drinking something that claimed to be coffee with the confidence of a line nobody could stop. Commander Thalek led the unit. Velhari. Tall. Sharp-faced. Built like every decision he had ever made had first passed through 3 layers of tactical software. His combat visor constantly displayed live threat analysis across the lower edge. Coalition commanders trusted systems the way ancient sailors trusted stars. Maybe more. The patrol itself looked routine. Survey route. Outer canyon region. Possible Murith scouting activity. Low threat probability. Which usually meant somebody was about to bleed. The unit consisted of 7 personnel. 2 Velhari soldiers. 2 Krevel heavy infantry. An Ithri medic named Letiz. A drone operator. And Elias. During the first briefing, Thalek glanced at the axe strapped across Elias's back exactly 11 times. Elias counted. "You are seriously deploying with that thing?" one of the Krevel finally asked. "Yes." The soldier frowned. "But why?" Elias shrugged. "Habit." The Krevel looked deeply disturbed by that answer. Letiz, sitting across the table, quietly stirred her drink. "You make everyone nervous," she said. Elias looked at her. "Good." That earned the smallest possible smile. The patrol launched the next morning. The canyon system stretched nearly 4 kilometers through broken stone and steep black cliffs. Wind moved through the rock in long hollow breaths. Too hollow. Elias noticed it immediately. The others did not. Coalition troops moved differently than humans. Cleaner. More efficient. But they relied on information arriving through systems first. Humans notice things before understanding them. Sometimes long before. Elias slowed slightly. Commander Thalek noticed. Problem? He asked. Maybe. Thalek's visor flickered as tactical scans updated. I detect nothing. Yeah, Elias said quietly. That's the problem. The unit kept moving. Stone shifted softly beneath their boots. Wind passed overhead. No movement. No heat signatures. No signal emissions. Perfect silence. Except it wasn't perfect. There is a kind of quiet that feels natural. And another kind that feels like something hiding underneath it. Elias stopped walking. Behind him, the unit halted automatically. Thalek stepped forward. Threat assessment. Elias didn't answer immediately. He was listening. Not actively. Not dramatically. Just listening the way humans always had. Tiny sounds. Pressure changes. Movement in air. The absence of birds. The wrong rhythm of falling dust. Millions of years of instincts trained long before language existed. Beside him, Thalek's tactical system continued searching. Nothing. No targets.
No signals.
No motion. The commander's voice tightened slightly. Lieutenant, I require actionable information. Elias kept staring at the cliffs. Hold position. That is not actionable. It is if you want everybody alive. Silence. The drone operator shifted nervously. The Krevel soldiers exchanged glances. Lettiz watched Elias carefully. Not confused. Interested. 30 seconds passed. Then 40. The coalition soldiers grew visibly uncomfortable. To them, standing still without system confirmation felt wrong. Like waiting for instructions from a machine that had stopped speaking. Then Elias heard it. Tiny. Almost nothing. A scrape. Stone against fabric. Left ridge. High angle. 70 meters. Human ears were never designed for war. They were designed for survival. Which turned out to be almost the same thing. Elias moved instantly. The revolver cleared its holster in one smooth motion. No targeting reticle. No charge-up sound. No electronic warning. Just movement. A single shot cracked through the canyon. The sound exploded off the cliffs. A shadow dropped from the rocks above. Dead before it hit the ground. Every coalition scanner lit up 1 second later. Threat detected. Hostile confirmed. Commander Thalek stared at his visor. Then at the body. Then at Elias. You fired before the system registered the target. Yes. That is not possible. Elias checked the ridge again. Sure it is. Another sound. Different angle. Right side. Closer. Elias moved before thought fully formed. Second shot. Another body fell. This time the coalition systems detected the hostile almost simultaneously. Almost. Not fast enough. The canyon erupted into movement. The Velhari soldiers raised rifles. The drone operator launched support drones. Thalek barked orders into dead air before realizing his communications feed had suddenly collapsed. Static. Then silence. A second later, every system in the unit failed. Visors darkened. Drone feeds vanished. Targeting systems died. The canyon swallowed technology whole. The drone operator looked horrified. My systems are down. The Velhari soldiers checked their rifles. No smart targeting. Signal loss across all channels. Commander Thalek's visor flickered uselessly. His tactical software was blind. Elias wasn't. Because none of his equipment cared. The revolver still worked. The axe still worked. His eyes still worked. His ears still worked. The Murith attackers rushed the canyon from both sides. Fast. Disciplined. Confident. They had prepared perfectly for electronic warfare. What they had not prepared for was humanity before electronics. Elias holstered the revolver and pulled the axe free. The motion was smooth.
Familiar.
The weapon settled into his grip like it belonged there. Maybe it did. The nearest Murith lunged toward him. Elias stepped sideways. One strike. Short. Brutal. Efficient. No wasted motion. The attacker dropped instantly. Another charged from the left. Elias pivoted. The axe moved again. Not fast. Not wild. Precise. Every movement carried the terrifying simplicity of something practiced too many times to require conscious thought anymore. Letty stared at him while dragging an injured Velhari soldier behind cover. There was no hesitation in Elias. No confusion. No adjustment period after losing technology. He fought exactly the same way a person keeps breathing after the lights go out. Natural. Automatic. Ancient. Commander Thalek fired controlled bursts manually now, forced to aim without assistance for the first time in years. The Velhari soldiers struggled. Good troops. Wrong training. The Coalition had built warfare around systems. Humans built systems around warfare. Very different philosophy. The canyon fight lasted less than 4 minutes. It felt longer. When the final Murith soldier fell, silence returned all at once. Hard silence. Heavy silence. The kind that arrives after violence leaves. Nobody moved immediately. Dust drifted slowly through the canyon air. One of the Velhari soldiers looked at Elias. Then at the axe. Then back at Elias again. You did not lose efficiency after system failure, he said carefully. Elias wiped blood from the edge of the axe with a cloth from his belt. No. How? Elias slid the weapon back across his shoulder. Practice. The Velhari soldier looked almost offended by that answer. Commander Thalek approached slowly. His visor remained dark. For the first time since Elias had met him, the commander looked uncertain. Your weapons require no external support, Thalek said. No. No signals. No power source. No synchronization. No. Thalek looked around the canyon. At the dead attackers. At the failed systems. At his own dark visor. Then back at Elias. You expected this possibility. Elias thought about that. Then nodded once. Humans always expect systems to fail eventually. Letty stood nearby listening quietly. And if they don't fail? She asked softly. Elias looked at the axe resting against his shoulder. Then great, he said. But if they do, we are still alive. Nobody had an answer to that. The return trip to the station felt different. Not because Elias had changed. Because the others had. Before the canyon, they had looked at his weapons like strange antiques. After the canyon, they looked at them the way sailors look at lifeboats during rough seas. Not comforting. Necessary. As the unit entered the station hangar, Commander Thalek finally spoke again. I need to submit a tactical report. Okay. The commander hesitated. Then asked quietly, how exactly do I explain what happened out there? Elias started walking toward the station doors. Behind him, crews rushed to repair damaged systems and restore dead communications. You tell the truth, Elias said. Thalek frowned. And what truth is that? Elias glanced back once. That humans remember things your species forgot. The tactical report reached Coalition intelligence 14 minutes after the patrol returned. By the end of the hour, it had already been flagged 3 separate times. Not because of the casualties. Not because of the ambush. Because of one sentence. Human operative maintained full combat effectiveness during total systems failure. Analyst Myra Sol opened the report while sitting alone in Processing Wing 3 surrounded by glowing data screens and enough caffeine to legally qualify as a controlled substance on at least 4 Coalition worlds. She read the sentence once. Then again. Then the attached combat footage. The canyon recording was incomplete because most systems had died during the engagement, but enough remained to make everyone uncomfortable. She watched the human stop walking before any sensor registered danger. She watched him react before Coalition systems identified targets. And she watched the moment every electronic platform failed. That was the part that mattered. Because the rest of the unit hesitated. The human didn't. Not even for a second. Myra leaned back slowly. That, she whispered to herself, is not normal. Her assistant looked over from the next station. What part? All of it. She reopened the footage. The human moved through the canyon with the terrifying confidence of someone functioning inside familiar conditions instead of catastrophic ones. That was the problem. To the Coalition, system failure was an emergency. To the human, it looked practiced. Myra pulled up Elias Ven's service file. Then frowned. Then sat up straighter. Then read the file a second time. Are you kidding me? What? Her assistant asked. She turned the screen toward him. The training list continued for 6 full pages. Primitive navigation. Manual targeting. Mechanical weapon maintenance. Low-tech survival operations. Signal loss combat doctrine. Close quarters archaic weapons specialization. Environmental tracking. Acoustic threat detection. Her assistant blinked twice. Why would anyone train all that? Myra scrolled further. Then found the answer hidden inside an old human military doctrine entry. Never assume technological superiority is permanent. She stared at that sentence for a while. Most Coalition species viewed progress as a straight line. You upgraded. Improved. Replaced. Advanced. Humans did something different. Humans upgraded. And refused to let go. Myra opened historical records. The deeper she looked, the stranger humanity became. They still taught celestial navigation despite faster-than-light systems. Still trained hand-written communication methods. Still used physical maps. Still maintained mechanical tools. Still archived printed books. Still trained soldiers to fight without support systems. Entire military divisions practiced operating under complete technological collapse. Not ceremonial practice. Not symbolic. Real training. Active doctrine. Myra rubbed her forehead slowly. They actually planned for this. Her assistant looked confused. Planned for what? The future failing. Across the station, Commander Thalek sat through formal debriefing with 3 senior officers and 1 increasingly alarmed intelligence observer. The observer kept replaying the canyon footage. Again. 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 Finally, she paused the recording on Elias standing motionless before the ambush. How did he know? She asked. Thalek folded his hands behind his back. He said he was listening. That is not an explanation. It is the explanation. The observer zoomed in on the image. The human stood completely still in the canyon. Calm. Patient. Like an animal hearing something too distant for others to notice yet. The observer looked unsettled. There were no active scans. No. No sensor support. No. No tactical feed. No. Then what was he using? Thalek was quiet for several seconds. Then he answered honestly. Himself. Nobody liked that answer. Because it created a question nobody in the room wanted to ask. What else could humans do without systems? 3 decks lower, Elias sat in his quarters sharpening the axe. Slow strokes. Steady rhythm. The sound of stone against steel filled the room softly. Letty stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of station tea. Am I interrupting something sacred? She asked. Elias glanced up. Only if you spill that. She walked inside. The Ithri moved carefully, almost gracefully, like someone permanently aware of fragile things around her. She handed him one of the cups and sat across from him. For a while neither spoke. Most species hated silence. Humans tolerated it. Letty's seemed to understand it. Finally she nodded toward the axe. You clean it after every mission. Yes. Why? Elias considered the question. Respect. For the weapon. For what it does. Let his watch the edge catch the room light. Humans talk about weapons differently. How so? She tilted her head slightly. Coalition soldiers describe weapons by capability, output, efficiency, precision. And humans. You talk about them like they're promises. That made Elias pause. Not because she was wrong. Because she wasn't. The axe rested across his knees. Worn handle. Scratched steel. Older than half the station technology combined. My grandfather carried one, Elias said quietly. Letty's looked at him but didn't interrupt. He told me something when I was young. The sharpening stone moved slowly along the blade. He said modern systems are wonderful right up until the moment they stop working. Lettiz smiled faintly. That sounds very human. Yeah. The room became quiet again. Not awkward quiet. Resting quiet. Outside, the station hummed with power systems, engines, communications arrays, automated defenses, tactical networks, and enough technology to run a small civilization. Inside the room sat a sharpened piece of steel that needed none of it. Lettiz watched Elias work. You know what frightens the others? She asked eventually. The axe. No. She folded her hands carefully around the teacup. It's how comfortable you were after everything failed. Elias stopped sharpening. That was probably true. The Coalition treated technological collapse like drowning. Humans treated it like bad weather. Dangerous. Unpleasant. But survivable. Machines break, Elias said simply. Lettiz stared at him for a moment. You say that like it's obvious. It is obvious. No, she said softly. Not here. Elias leaned back slightly against the wall. The station lights reflected faintly across the axe blade. For most species in the Coalition, Lettiz continued, technology became safety. Then certainty. Then identity. She looked directly at him. But humans never fully trusted it, did they? Elias smiled slightly. Not happy. Just honest. We trust it, he said. We just don't worship it. Lettiz went very still after that, because suddenly several things made sense at once. Human redundancy systems. Human survival doctrine. Human obsession with backups. Human refusal to abandon old methods. Human distrust of complete automation. It wasn't paranoia. It was memory. Somewhere deep inside human civilization existed an old fear older than space travel itself. The fear of being helpless. And humanity had spent thousands of years making sure it never happened again. Lettiz looked at the axe once more. Back in the canyon, she said quietly, when the systems failed. Elias nodded. You weren't afraid. He thought about that carefully before answering. Then shook his head once. No, he admitted. What were you? The sharpening stone moved again. Prepared. The words stayed in the room long after he said it. Later that night, far above the station in a dark Murith command vessel, the commander known as 7 Times Rebuilt reviewed the canyon engagement personally. Frame by frame. Second by second. She watched the human move through total systems collapse without hesitation. That interested her more than the kills. Most soldiers fought well when conditions favored them. Very few remained calm when the structure around them disappeared. The human had. That meant something important. Her intelligence officer stood beside the display. We confirmed the human's identity, he said. She did not look away from the footage. Tell me. Lieutenant Elias Venn. Human Expeditionary Forces. The footage paused on Elias gripping the axe. Her officer continued. He specializes in pre-digital combat doctrine. 7 Times Rebuilt slowly turned toward him. Pre-digital. Yes, Commander. She considered the phrase carefully, then looked back at the screen. The human's face remained calm even in the middle of system collapse. Not reckless. Not emotional. Certain. Like he had already accepted this possibility long ago. What else? She asked. The officer hesitated slightly, then handed her another file. We found archived human military philosophy records. She opened them, and immediately understood why her intelligence teams were nervous. One sentence sat highlighted across the top of the file. If your enemy depends entirely on one system, destroy the system. Below it sat another. If you depend entirely on one system, you deserve what happens next. 7 Times Rebuilt read both lines twice, then slowly closed the file. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerously close to respect. The suppression trap was designed perfectly. That was the worst part. 7 Times Rebuilt had spent most of her military career studying how advanced species fought. Coalition doctrine depended on layers of systems working together. Communication. Targeting. Drone support. Battlefield synchronization. Cut those apart, and most units became slower, confused, vulnerable. The plan was simple. Disable the systems. Collapse coordination. Eliminate the unit. Efficient. Clean. Predictable. The attack began 3 days after the canyon patrol. Elias knew something was wrong the moment the station alarms failed. Not activated. Failed. 1 second the corridor lights glowed white. The next they flickered dark red. Then static rolled through the walls like distant thunder. People stopped walking. Screens died. The station's central network disappeared all at once. No warnings. No transition. Just absence. Around him, coalition personnel froze. That was the first mistake technology-dependent civilizations always made. When systems failed, they paused. Humans moved. Elias was already turning before the emergency lights fully activated. His hand found the revolver automatically. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Just practiced. Letty's came around the corner at nearly a run. Power collapse across multiple decks, she said. Communications are dead. Yeah. You knew. Elias checked the corridor intersections. No, he said. But somebody planned this too carefully. A distant explosion shook the station. Metal groaned somewhere deep in the walls. Emergency bulkheads started closing section by section. Then stopped halfway. System failure again. The station sounded wrong. Like a machine forgetting how to breathe. Commander Thalek's voice suddenly burst through local emergency speakers in fragments. All personnel, defensive positions, unknown hostile boarding. Static swallowed the rest. Letty's looked shaken for the first time since Elias had met her. The station defenses are offline. Elias nodded once. That's why they attack now. Another explosion. Closer. Then gunfire. Not coalition pulse fire. Different. Sharp. Controlled. Boarding teams. 7 times rebuilt had not come to test them again. She had come to learn. And learning, Elias knew, could be very dangerous. The hallway lights dimmed further. Around them, station personnel struggled with dead equipment. Doors would not open. Tactical displays remained blank. Automated systems refused commands. People kept touching dead screens like belief alone would restart them. Elias started moving. Letty's followed. Where are we going? She asked. Command deck. With half the station failing. That's where the important problems usually are. Another blast shook the corridor. This one much closer. Then came shouting. Not human. Murith. 3 station security personnel stumbled backward around the corner ahead. 1 injured. 1 panicking. 1 trying desperately to reboot a dead rifle. Elias saw the problem instantly. They're here, the guard shouted. Murith soldiers rounded the corridor behind them. Fast. Armored. Disciplined. Their weapons active. Coalition security raised rifles that refused to sync targeting. Half a second of hesitation. That was enough. The first guard died before his weapon fired. The second froze trying to restart his tactical visor. The third managed 1 wild shot before impact threw him against the wall. Letty's grabbed the injured guard and dragged him behind cover. Elias stepped forward. The revolver fired once. The lead Murith soldier dropped immediately. No charging sound. No targeting beam. No warning. Just violence arriving suddenly. The second attacker swung toward Elias. Too slow. Second shot. Third attacker rushed aggressively through the corridor. Elias holstered the revolver before the body even hit the floor. Then the axe was in his hand. The movement looked terrifyingly natural. Like the weapon had always belonged there. The attacker lunged. Elias stepped inside the strike. 1 motion. 1 impact. Done. No wasted movement. No hesitation. The corridor became quiet except for emergency alarms struggling to stay alive somewhere deep in the station. The surviving security officer stared at Elias. Then at the axe. Then at the dead attackers. You switched weapons before your firearm was empty, he said weakly. Distance changed. The guard blinked twice. That answer somehow disturbed him more. Letty's finished stabilizing the injured officer. You trained for this, she said quietly. Elias checked the corridor again. Humans train for lots of things. No, she replied softly. Not like this. And she was right. Because Elias did not look stressed, or surprised, or overwhelmed. He looked focused. Like the world had finally become understandable again. Machines failed. People attacked. Survive. Simple. Ahead of them, deeper in the station, more fighting echoed through metal corridors. Pulse fire. Explosions. Screaming. Systems dying. The Coalition station was losing the battle because the station itself no longer knew how to function without automation. Humans understood that kind of chaos. Human history was full of it. Elias moved toward the command sector. Lettiz followed close behind. You know what frightens me? She asked while they moved. The boarding teams. No. She looked at the axe in his hand. It's that you seem calmer now than you were during inspection week. Elias thought about that. Then shrugged slightly. Clear problems are easier. Ahead, 2 more Murith soldiers appeared near a junction corridor. One aimed immediately. Elias moved before the trigger pull finished. The axe struck the weapon aside. The revolver fired upward beneath the attacker's armor. The second soldier tried to retreat. Too late. Everything Elias did looked horribly efficient. Not because he was stronger. Not because he was faster. Because he wasted nothing. No unnecessary motion. No panic. No confusion. Just decisions turning directly into action. Lettiz watched him fight and finally understood something important. Coalition species treated combat like a technical skill. Humans treated it like weather survival. Something terrible that could happen anytime. Something you prepared for because pretending otherwise was stupid. They reached the command deck 30 minutes after the attack began. The doors were half open due to power failure. Inside, emergency lights painted everything dark red. Commander Thalek stood near the central tactical display surrounded by officers struggling to restore dead systems. The room looked exhausted. Thalek looked up as Elias entered. Then his eyes dropped immediately to the axe. Not because it was primitive anymore. Because it was working. We've regained partial systems control, Thalek said. But internal networks remain unstable. How bad? The commander hesitated. Then answered honestly. We designed this station assuming automation would survive long enough to protect us. Elias nodded once. And now? Thalek looked around the damaged command center. Around the dead displays. Around the officers suddenly forced to do calculations themselves. Around the silence where machine intelligence used to be. Now, the commander admitted quietly, I think humanity prepared for something the rest of us considered impossible. Lettiz leaned against the damaged wall nearby. The system's failing. Thalek looked at Elias. No, he said slowly. The system's failing, and people continuing anyway. Silence settled across the command deck. Heavy silence. Truth-shaped silence. Then one of the tactical officers suddenly looked up from a partially restored sensor feed. We found the enemy command signature. Everyone moved immediately. The tactical officer swallowed once. It's the Murith commander herself. Commander Thalek straightened. 7 times rebuilt. Yes, sir. The room grew tense instantly. Even Elias recognized the name. A strategist famous for rebuilding entire military doctrines after defeat. Dangerous. Patient. Brilliant. The tactical officer enlarged the feed. A narrowband transmission source hidden near the station exterior. Shielded from Coalition jamming patterns. Elias stared at it for half a second. Then understood. She stuttered us, he said quietly. Thalek frowned. What? She knew exactly which systems to kill. Lettiz looked toward him. But she didn't understand one thing. Elias adjusted his grip on the axe. No, he agreed. She thought technology was the foundation. Outside the damaged command deck windows, the station drifted silently through deep space while alarms echoed through failing corridors. And somewhere beyond those walls, a Murith commander was beginning to realize something terrifying. Humanity had not kept old weapons because they feared the future. Humanity kept old weapons because they remembered the past. And the past had taught them one brutal lesson above all others. Anything built can break. So eventually, you learn how to fight without it. The battle for the station ended 4 hours later. Not with a decisive victory. Not with some brilliant tactical maneuver. And not because coalition systems finally recovered. It ended because the Murith boarding forces realized something had gone very wrong. Every time they disabled coalition technology, the humans became harder to stop. That was not how advanced species were supposed to behave. By the end of the fighting, half the station remained dark. Emergency lights painted the corridors in deep red shadows. Repair crews moved through smoke and broken wiring. Dead drones littered the floors beside dead soldiers. And everywhere Elias walked, people looked at the axe differently now. Not curiously. Not skeptically. Carefully. Like they had finally understood what it was for. Commander Thalek submitted the official after-action report personally. The document took 63 pages. Most of it described system failures, tactical breakdowns, communications collapse, and structural damage. But one section kept getting revised. The human section. Because every draft sounded wrong. Too small. Too technical. Too incomplete. Finally, Thalek deleted the entire paragraph and started over. Human combat doctrine remained fully operational under total electronic suppression conditions. He stopped typing. Then slowly added another line. Recommendation. Coalition military strategy must reconsider dependence on technological continuity. He read the sentence twice before sending the report. Not because it was inaccurate. Because it was going to upset a lot of very important people. Across the station, intelligence analysts were already arguing. Some believed humans were paranoid. Others believed they were brilliant. A few quietly suspected both things were true. Myra Sol sat in intelligence processing surrounded by open reports and historical files. The deeper she dug into human history, the stranger humanity became. Every major human advancement had carried the same pattern. Invent something powerful. Then immediately assume it could fail. Create backups. Then backups for the backups. Digital systems. Mechanical overrides. Automated targeting. Manual controls. Artificial gravity. Emergency ladders. Advanced medicine. Field surgery kits. Human civilization seemed built around one central belief. Nothing lasts forever. At first Myra found that depressing. Now she found it terrifyingly intelligent. Her terminal chimed softly. A new document arrived from Central Review. She opened it. Then sat very still. The file contained a translated copy of 7 times rebuilt's tactical notes recovered after the battle. Most of it was military analysis. Threat assessments. Engagement observations. Countermeasure failures. But near the end, the Murith commander had written something strange. Not tactical. Personal. Myra read the passage slowly. These are not people who forgot to move on from older weapons. These are people who remember exactly why those weapons existed in the first place. She kept reading. When systems collapsed, the humans did not experience panic. They experienced recognition. Myra leaned back in her chair. Because suddenly she understood the real difference. Most species saw technology as proof they had escaped weakness. Humans saw technology as temporary assistance. Useful. Powerful. Wonderful. Temporary. The station held a recognition ceremony 6 days later. Coalition Command called it a celebration of defensive success. Nobody attending actually believed that was the important part. Bay 12 had been cleaned and repaired enough to look respectable. Lights hung overhead. Music played softly through repaired speakers. Alien officers filled the room in formal uniforms heavy with medals and rank markings. Elias hated every second of it. He stood near the back wall in dress uniform with the axe resting across his back. The weapon had been cleaned carefully. The edge sharpened. The wooden grip polished smooth by years of hands. Letty stood beside him holding 2 drinks. "You look uncomfortable," she observed. "I am uncomfortable." "You fought boarding teams without blinking." "Yeah," Elias said. "That made more sense than this." She laughed quietly. Across the room, Commander Thalek delivered the formal address. He spoke about courage, coordination, Inter-species cooperation. Standard ceremony language. Then he stopped halfway through a sentence. The room noticed immediately. Thalek looked down at his prepared speech, then calmly set it aside. When I first met Lieutenant Elias Venn, he said slowly, I believed humanity maintained archaic combat traditions out of cultural attachment. The room became quiet. Thalek looked directly at the assembled officers. I was wrong. No movement anywhere. No sound except the faint hum of station systems overhead. The commander continued. We believed advanced warfare meant dependence on advanced systems. Humans apparently reached a different conclusion. His eyes shifted briefly toward Elias. They prepared for the possibility that everything could fail. A few officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Thalek noticed. So did we, one officer called carefully. We maintain emergency redundancies. Yes, Thalek agreed. Until the redundancies fail too. Silence again. Because everyone in the room had seen the station go dark. Everyone had felt the panic that followed. Everyone had watched humans continue functioning anyway. Thalek stepped away from the podium. The Coalition spent centuries asking how to build stronger systems, he said. Humanity also asked a different question. He paused. How do we survive without them? No applause followed. This was beyond applause now. This was the moment an idea enters a civilization and refuses to leave. Letti's glanced sideways at Elias. You know what they're really reacting to. What? You made them realize progress and dependence are not the same thing. Elias looked around the room. Alien officers. Advanced species. Powerful civilizations. All standing quietly beneath station lights while trying to process a truth humanity learned thousands of years ago in forests and deserts and ruined cities long before space travel existed. Tools matter. Skills matter more. Then Thalek did something unexpected. He turned toward Elias fully. Lieutenant, he said, would you explain the axe? The entire room looked over. Elias stayed still for several seconds, then sighed softly and stepped forward. No podium. No speech notes. Just a tired human standing under artificial lights holding something older than empires. He rested one hand against the worn wooden handle. When humans first made tools, he said quietly, they changed everything. The room stayed perfectly silent. We got smarter, faster, safer. He looked around slowly. Then we made better tools. Then better ones after that. His fingers tapped lightly against the axe handle. But there's a problem with tools. A pause. They break. No one moved. Elias continued. So humans learned two lessons. His voice stayed calm. Simple. Clear. First lesson, build better tools. Another pause. Second lesson, never forget how to survive without them. Somewhere near the front row, Myra Sol felt chills run across both arms. Because suddenly the axe stopped looking primitive. It stopped looking old. It stopped looking outdated. Instead, it looked like a message. A very old message. One carried so long humanity no longer even realized they were carrying it. Elias looked down briefly at the worn steel head. My grandfather used to say something, he said. The room leaned into the silence. He said modern systems are luxuries. Elias glanced back up. Useful luxuries. Amazing luxuries. But still luxuries. He rested his hand fully around the handle now. This, he said softly, this is insurance. Nobody laughed. Because everybody in that room remembered the station going dark. After the ceremony ended, officers remained in small groups talking quietly. Not about the battle. About humanity. About contingency planning. About dependency. About old things that still worked. Letti's found Elias near the observation deck later that night. Stars drifted silently beyond the glass. The station lights reflected faintly across the viewport. You changed them, she said. Elias shook his head once. No. You really believe that? He leaned against the wall beside the observation glass. They changed themselves, he replied. People only learn things when they're ready. Letty studied him for a moment, then looked down at the axe resting quietly across his back. So what happens now? Elias followed her gaze. The steel edge reflected distant starlight. Now, he said. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. Now they start remembering things again. Far away, inside a secured Murith archive, the tactical notes of 7 times rebuilt remained flagged at the highest priority level. The final line of her report had become required reading for senior command staff. Not because it explained humanity, because it warned about them. The final line read, "Do not mistake technological advancement for technological dependence. Humans did not survive because their tools evolved. Humans survived because they never allowed themselves to become helpless without them." And in a quiet station room 40 light years from Earth, an old axe rested beside a human soldier's bed. Silent, patient, worn smooth in exactly the places hands had needed it to be. The station around it pulsed with engines, systems, signals, and machines complicated enough to cross the stars. The axe needed none of them. It never had. It still worked.